Welcome to Club E. Hi, I'm Rick Brimacombe of Brimacombe and Associates. I am your architect of business growth and will work with you to unlock your potential and amplify the scale of your company. Today, we're talking about how to find and keep great people in today's environment. I want to thank our sponsors, Irish Titan, an e-commerce and web development firm, Highland Bank, a locally owned community bank, Romaine Berg, a digital marketing agency, Schwegman, Lumberg, Woosner, an intellectual property law firm, and Voyager U, tools and community to build your independent work life. Subscribe and like our Club E channel. We'd like to hear from you. Please just take a moment, hit that subscribe button. Also, that will allow us to deliver better content to you. And as a reminder, you can catch our Club E on your favorite podcast platform, whether that be Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, and many others. All right, with that, I'd like to welcome today's guest. Welcome, Heather Polivka, founder of Heather P Solutions. Heather, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, well, Heather and I connected up at a recent Club E event. We had a great conversation, and that led to today's session. So, Heather, I appreciate you supporting Club E, and B, sharing with me a little bit about what you have been up to and what you work on, which I found fascinating, and why we have you here today to share some of that wisdom and knowledge with our community. So again, thank you very much for joining us. And then now, why don't we kick it off with you telling everybody a little bit about yourself, your firm, what you're up to, and the kinds of projects that you are working on.
Great, thank you. Well, the unique thing about me in the space that I work in is I bring 20 years of marketing expertise, and I marry that with 11 years across the full spectrum of HR. So it's bringing together marketing and HR, and I have some exposure and background in technology and operations. So I really take a holistic look at the employee experience, or how we unlock the employee potential within companies. And I work the value stream all the way from the employer brand, how we communicate and the perception of a company as a place to work, through the culture, which is how we get work done within the business, to employee engagement and retention. And then a key offshoot from that has been new manager training and development, because that is just a gap I kept seeing time and time again with the companies that I was working with and serving. So my work falls along that entire value chain. And what's unique is that I bring this cross-functional lens into it.
And that came from, I'm guessing, some of your prior stops along your career journey, and some great Minnesota-based companies, Target and UHG, among others. So maybe talk just a little bit about some of the things that you learned during your career earlier on that have kind of formulated who you are at this point.
Yeah. Well, I came out of my MBA program at Purdue, and with an offer from Target that I was really excited about, because it's a very empowered environment. When I worked there, I don't mean to say it's not, or it is now. It's been a while. But that's what I loved about it, is this opportunity to run a business. So it gave me that exposure to it, certainly on a much larger scale. But I was really drawn and attracted to that. And I had some great bosses and some great leaders. And in fact, I followed a former Target leader to a company, a mid-sized turnaround. And I was super excited because I knew my boss, really, really liked her. I was excited about the work because it was going to be building a whole product marketing function and working with brands and starting an online distribution channel. So I'm like, great work, great boss, sign me up. When I got there, however, I discovered that the work environment was quite toxic. And I share that because had I not had that personal experience, had I not had the experience where I came home every night and I was just drained, and my new husband at the time, held up the mirror and was like, the person who leaves in the morning is not the person who's coming home at night. And I could feel that. And that's what made me very open when United Health Group reached out and said, hey, we're creating this new position. We want to bring a consumer marketing lens and mindset and consumer centric focus from marketing, but bring it into our talent space. And had I not had that experience, that unfortunate experience, it wouldn't have had me say yes to United Health Group and the opportunity to build out their employer brand and all of their talent marketing and capabilities, which led me to launching the first social media channel and leading one of their key work streams when it came to their culture transformation, and then adapting it culturally for Brazil and Ireland and India and the Philippines. I had such an awesome ride there. As it grew from 80,000 employees to 320,000 employees, I kept getting pushed into the deep end of the pool to do new things in this space of marketing and HR. And I thrived and I loved it. And after 11 years, I'm like, I want to keep doing this, but I want to do it for small and mid-sized businesses because I grew up, my mom was an entrepreneur. She started a business. And I always thought I'd somehow end up doing that. And now I knew what it was, the work I wanted to do that would have me go off on my own and start my own business. So that whole journey through Target and United Health Group has led me to where I am today. And I have profound gratitude for both organizations.
Yeah. And then you bring up an interesting point, which I'm going to dig into a little bit here. And I had that as well, working for larger companies earlier in my career and then moving towards smaller ones. So obviously big difference working for yourself and working at those massive global companies, pros and cons to both. Curious what you have found the most joy with and get the most satisfaction with having your own business.
Yeah. Oh, great question. The joy I experience is the immediate impact I get to have. And that just fuels me. And that's what can become harder in a large organization is seeing that impact, because sometimes, there's so many people and dynamics and things to navigate. It can take a while to have that impact. And so that's probably the thing that fuels me is I can go in right away and really make a difference for the business, for the people working within the business. So that would be the thing that fuels me is every single time I see a light bulb go on, or I know something has been shifted because I've been able to contribute my vast experience. And particularly during this time of these last 2 years and what I focus on, I launched in March of 2020. I literally launched with 3 clients. And then within 3 weeks, I had no clients. It's my worst case business plan.
Yeah, big difference of the start of March of 2020 versus the end of March of 2020.
Exactly. And of course, I had that moment of like fear and, oh my gosh, all of that. And yet, I think one of the things you realize running your own business is the perceived security of larger companies or being a W-2 is just that. It's a perception, not necessarily a reality. But I just approached it as right now, companies need me. They're going to have to make really tough decisions. And so how do I help them navigate this in a way that one takes care of their employees, but also protects their brand? Because at some point, I knew at that point, at some point, we're going to come out of this. And how they treated their employees at the start and throughout was going to have a big impact on their employer brand and perception as a place to work when they came out of this. So I just started showing up and being of service. And it was funny because some of the small businesses and mid-sized businesses were like, we can't pay you, right? I'm like, I know, but I want to be of service. And at some point, you'll see the value, and at some point, you'll be able to pay me because you'll know the impact that I can make.
Right.
And that was my approach. And that opportunity to be of service, and right now to help companies navigate return to office, and finding and keeping great talent. All of that it makes me excited to get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah. So last question on this front. Let's go the opposite way. So you've had your business now for 2 years.
Yeah.
What has been the most challenging thing for you? And maybe it was something that you foresaw, or maybe it was something that surprised you. But what do you think is the most challenging aspect of having your own business?
You know, that's a great question. And before I went out on my own, I met with someone who had been out on his own for 10 years. And I asked him what advice he would give me. He said, "I don't really have advice. Let me just share, two stories." One was, he goes, "I spent my whole first year still sort of keeping an eye on jobs and opportunities. And I kept my foot in that world." And he goes, "By the end of year one, I wasn't sure if the business hadn't taken off because I wasn't 100% committed or because it wasn't a good idea." And he's like, "So I just invite you to go all in and have no plan B." So that was number one. But what was super interesting was his next point, which he said, "I've never had to deal with myself more than I've had to in running my own business." And at the time, I thought that was super profound. I even wrote it down like, ooh, but I didn't get it. And there is a lot of dealing with your own mindset as an entrepreneur, that I know I'm not the same business owner I was even a year ago. That I don't know why it is, but those same sort of fears and the wondering and the if anyone thinks imposter syndrome is a challenge in corporate America, try being out on your own. That I think that is the most surprising to me. And yet once you really, like, now I have a mindset practice that is part of my daily prep for my workday. Once you master that, and the worst neighborhood is between your two ears,
Yeah.
then it's really empowering and powerful. And that's where that confidence I could see in entrepreneurs that I could never quite put my finger on what that was. I really look at it now as going, oh, they mastered all of that, stuff that goes on between our ears that can disempower us and not have us be as effective as we're capable of. And that's what I would say was the most surprising and challenging thing.
All right, so let's dive into the meat of what I think we were aiming towards here, and what I know our audience is going to learn a lot from. Let's talk about finding people. Right now, what do you consider to be the best practices to finding the right kind of people, the right kind of talent?
Yeah. So it's interesting because when you think about it, we've never been in a day and age where it's easier to find people. The internet and social media, and people have information and profiles all over the place on the internet. So finding people is not necessarily, the challenge, but to your point, the right people. I think the first thing is a company has to be really clear about who they are. And I see so many, in fact, even just this morning, I'm scrolling on LinkedIn and I saw 5 different posts because I started counting because we were having this conversation of leaders saying, "We're hiring," and that's it. Or, "Come work for us. We have a great place to work," but they provide no definition of what that is or what that looks like. And that tells me that they're not really clear about who they are. And it's sort of like in the dating world, if you're not really clear and confident about who you are, what your strengths are, what you have to offer, and also what are the things that are kind of a no for you, you're not going to be able to attract someone who's a fit. And I think there's a lot of companies who are realizing they don't have that clarity around who they are, so much so that even their leaders cannot speak effectively about why choose us. So I actually think that is the greater problem, is the lack of clarity about who companies are. And if you don't have that lack of clarity in who you are, then I'm going to guess you haven't done the work to say, here's the talent we need to drive our business strategy. And we've designed our work experience to meet the needs of that talent pool so that we know exactly what we're offering, who we're offering it to, and why we're offering it. And that is the water level has now dropped enough that it's showing when that hasn't been done.
Sure. So companies, if they're honest with themselves and reflect on kind of where they're at, they might be here from a talent perspective and they want to get here, and there's this gap.
Yeah.
How can companies go about finding the talent in today's market, which is very tight, to fill that gap or bridge that gap?
Yeah, well, that's where to that point, and I'm going to kind of loop back to what I was saying before of what is the talent that's critical for driving your business? Meaning it's critical to your business model, but it also creates your competitive advantage. And understanding what those needs are for that talent pool, and then looking at your employee experience, and there's 8 different aspects of the employee experience, and going, is our current experience that we're delivering, does it meet the needs for that talent pool so that we can be attractive and we can be a great fit? And are we authentically delivering on that? I say all of that sort of internal work first because the greatest source for it has been and always will be for really great talent is talent that gets referred into you by your own employees.
Sure.
And if your employees are not talking at the happy hour or with their friends and family about why they should come work here, or even the people that they know, that's a huge indication that, they may be treading water, but they're not excited. There's not something that is compelling to them. And that's why, first and foremost, you want to have the employees who are actually living your experience be advocates for you. And then once you're doing that authentically, I play a little game with myself. I check a company's website and what they say versus their reviews on Indeed and Glassdoor as a place to work, and to see how close or how far apart are those. Because candidates are savvy. They look at these things, they know. And while they're also savvy enough to know that maybe all the reviews on Indeed and Glassdoor, some might be from disgruntled former employees, they're savvy, they can pick those things out. But if they
Sure.
see a theme show up time and time again, that's part of the reason why, they're not going to be seeking you out, or they're not going to respond when you reach out to them. And if you can't, especially competitive talent, which a lot of it is right now, if you can't verbalize why they should choose you, then why should they choose you? And I also did an exercise. I went in and I looked through a number of job postings. And it is a lot about, I'm going to use my dating analogy again, going on a first date and someone just talks about themselves. Here's who we are. Here's what we're looking for. Here's, what we need the candidate to be. This is what we require, and nothing in there about what's in it for the candidate and why the candidate should consider them as an employer. So, it's now a give and take relationship. It should have been before, but now with the pandemic, it's a give and take. So be clear about who you are, cultivate experience for the talent you want to attract and retain, and then make sure you're authentically delivering on that, and that all your leaders know how to talk about it, whether they're, in a networking group or whether they're posting something online about hiring.
So at Brimacombe Capital, one of the things that we would look for would be a differentiated product or service that can come in a variety of different forms. And there's a number of different ways you could try to figure out whether that is the case or not, and then whether it's defendable and whether it's something that maybe can last long term. So there's a lot of different things that go into making an investment in a portfolio of 10, 11 companies. And so this is a key factor and one that we hang our hat on a lot. How can companies differentiate themselves when they're trying to attract talent, especially if they're a smaller player with maybe not as much brand recognition or not as big of a budget or what have you? So how can a company go about differentiating itself to attract talent?
Yeah, Rick, everything you just said about how you help companies make sure they've got a differentiated product or service and how they're going to capitalize. That's the exact thought process that needs to be brought to the talent space. And it really hasn't been as much as it's needed to right now. So I would say first and foremost, all of that thought process that we use to make sure our products or services are distinctive, attractive to our target markets, et cetera, it's the same thought process we have to apply to talent. Now, I get it. Some people might think it's all about like nap pods and foosball tables or free lunches.
Or beer.
Or beer. And maybe to certain talent pools it is. But part of it is really just like we do on the products and services side, is understanding our consumer. So what is it our employees really want or need, or the talent we're trying to attract? And I have two examples that are opposite ends of the spectrum. So the first one I'm going to give you is Bumble. Okay, high growth company. They target, their target customer is women. They know that in order to best serve women with their platform, they need to have women as a notable part of their talent pool internally, and especially when they're designing experiences. And so they have really been intentional about designing their work experience and their benefits that support women. And they have come up with some really unusual benefits that I've never seen or heard before, because they understand who their target talent pool is so much. So guess what? Bumble isn't struggling to find talent, and Bumble isn't struggling to create diverse and an equitable workforce, because they've been really clear about who they're targeting. Now you go, okay, well, that's a high growth tech company, Heather. What about, to your point, a smaller company? I have two more examples. So I talked to a CEO of a manufacturing business, 200 employees, okay? Not huge. And he goes, Heather, most of our people, they're living paycheck to paycheck. And one of the things that we learned is that the reason they'll go down the road for like an extra dollar is because they're living paycheck to paycheck. And we also know absenteeism increases when there's money stress in the household. And that money stress could be an unexpected medical expense. It could be they're going through a divorce. It could be because they're in debt. So one of the benefits they started offering was access to financial planning to help pay down debt and start saving for their employees. Not an expensive, that wasn't an expensive benefit. And then also access to an arbitrator for things like going through divorce. He goes, Heather, the cost was minimal. And yet our employees knew, like, we cared about them. We cared about what created stress in their lives. And all of a sudden they're not walking down the street for an extra dollar. So that's an example of, again, knowing what impacts your employees. And then the last example I'm going to give is I had a coffee with a business owner just 2 weeks ago, and he's got a business of 7 employees. And he goes, I always just try to know like what's happening for my employees because they're hourly. And he goes, what's happening right now? Gas, the price of gas. So he came in and he gave everyone a $50 gas card. I love that, because guess what? Those large corporations that we compete against, they couldn't afford to buy every single employee a $50 gas card. But that's an example of being really in tune with his employees. And by the way, it's not the only thing he does. He's so in tune with what's impacting his employees. He regularly does things like that. And I actually think, while small businesses don't have the name recognition, I think they have an advantage of being able to create something really distinctive and personal, which is what people are seeking in their lives and in their work right now.
So talk a little bit about retention, because companies are spending so much time, energy, and money to get the talent that they need in the environment we're in. But then it's super important to do what they can to keep those people once they've attracted them to the company. So talk a little bit about the retention side of things.
Yeah, that's such a great call out and great question. And in fact, one of my first aspects that I look at when I'm about to engage with a client is what is their spending of attraction versus retention. And right now, a lot of companies have that really out of whack. And that's why last year we saw 1 in 4 new hires leave within 6 months. So, so now those companies, they're spending that same money over and over and over again. So my number one thing is, are you spending as much on retention as you are on attraction? And retention would look like if you've had to raise maybe the compensation to be able to attract people, are you proactively being equitable in your pay with the employees you already have? Because nothing will irritate someone further. And I know several people who've had this experience of, I've been here 3 years. And so that you could fill a seat, you brought someone in at my salary with 3 years of experience. And now you're making me ask you for an increase in compensation versus, which feels kind of icky, versus imagine that same employer coming to them and saying, okay, we value your experience, we're going to give you this bump, and making it equitable. So that's an example of retention. But the one that I'm really passionate about is training our managers, because most first and second line managers don't get any people leadership training. And especially now, we've had, it always has been that maybe your star salesperson, they would promote into the sales manager, or best customer service person they would promote, even though the being able to produce results individually is not the same as being able to lead people to produce results. So we've always had that disconnect. But right now, because of the turnover, we're now promoting people because they're the last person standing. Like they're the only one with any institutional knowledge. And so they're being promoted into these leadership roles. And then only 30% of them get any training, development, or support. And I have a lot of compassion for them because a lot of businesses are going, in fact, I talked to one business, they had 14 locations and they had 11 new managers in those 14 locations. And that's overwhelming. So I get it. But if you don't train the managers, then you're going to have that turnover, because the number one reason people leave is because they're a manager. 70% of the engagement of an employee is determined by the relationship between them and their direct report and their direct supervisor. So we got
Can I jump in just for a second?
Yeah.
I always thought that was the case, but I also didn't know if that was just kind of conventional wisdom or a wives' tale. So you're saying the biggest gap out there that ends up leading people to leave is dissatisfaction with their manager or their superior or the boss or whatever.
Yes. And the studies have shown that time and time and time again. And even people who, the second most common reason people leave is lack of growth and development opportunities. But if you think about the role that their manager plays in that, because you can stretch someone in their role, you can give them, extra assignments, you can have them work on something they're really excited about. It doesn't have to be that people can see themselves moving up a ladder. Yes, that's some of it. But really, it's also most of the time just, I want to be challenged. I want to know I'm growing. I want to know that I'm being invested in as a person. And so the manager plays a key role in that as well.
So what about opportunities for companies in today's market? What do you see as the best opportunities for those companies to retain the people they have? And I mean, you touched on one of the key ones, which I've often thought about is, the salaries and making sure the existing employees are being taken care of relative to the new ones that come in. But talk a little bit about the opportunity that you see as best for companies to retain folks at this moment in time.
Yeah, there's who a company says they are and what they say they value. And then there's the lived experience of the employees. And how big the gap is between those two, you can directly trace to business outcomes like turnover. You can even trace it to customer satisfaction, customer retention, productivity, and profitability. So the biggest thing companies need to look at is closing the gap between who they say they are and the lived experience of the employees. And that includes things like what you and I were just talking about is pay equity. When people don't feel like they're valued or being treated fairly, you've just lost them because you've lost their trust, you've lost their loyalty. So that's why pay equity is really important. There's a lot of companies that have some pay equity issues this year because of the salaries that they brought people or the rates that they brought people in to, from a compensation perspective. The second is that also is within that realm is if you have leaders who are not walking the talk of your values and your mission, like not really. And by the way, it doesn't matter if their boss thinks they're walking their talk. It matters if their employees and their team thinks they're walking their talk. And if they're not walking their talk, and as a company, you are not addressing that, you're going to have people walking out the door because there's just a low tolerance for that. And then I come back to the manager training and development. The people leadership skills are really critical. And if companies today, 80% of a company's development budget is spent on the top 20% of the company. And so you have a lot of first line and second line managers who actually touch the most people in your organization, but they don't have the training and the skills to do that. And so you're leaving trial and error for those managers. And so I look at that and go, are you investing in your managers? Because that's also an investment in your employees. People want to feel valued. They want to feel known. They want to feel seen. And they want to have a leader who knows how to lead them in a way that allows them to perform at a high level and perform at their best and also produce business results. Those two don't have to be mutually exclusive. In fact, they actually go hand in hand.
Let's go back to the employee experience for a moment. We touched on it a little earlier. You talked about having free lunches. We talked about having foosball or ping pong or beer or whatever, nap pods, what have you. Anyway, you say that that isn't necessarily the case as to what they need to have to retain folks. We've touched on some of those things so far, but tell us a little bit more about why it's not so much about kind of the fancy eye candy kinds of things.
Yeah, there's been research done by a number of organizations that sometimes they put it into 7 buckets, 8 buckets, 10 buckets, but I have it in 8. There's 8 aspects of the employee experience that are most critical for companies to walk their talk in. And if they do that, that's what leads to more engaged employees. And when you have more engaged employees, more retention. And what's interesting is, even though we know this, engagement overall in the US has remained pretty unchanged for the past couple of decades, with one exception. And that exception is in the first 4 months of the pandemic. Interesting. It was the highest levels of engagement we've seen in a long time. And it's because if you think about what companies were doing during that time, we care about your safety. Even though we've never worked remotely before, overnight, we're going to make that happen. We're going to over communicate. So they were cared for, they were protected, and they were over communicated with. And all of a sudden, you had employees more engaged. And then we kind of got fatigued and went back, and we've slid back into, our ways of being. And now engagement levels since September of 2020, engagement levels remain what they were for the 2 decades before the pandemic. And that points to a couple of things. So I'll touch on the 8 aspects of the experience. The first is a sense of purpose and valued. So, I know what my work is contributing. You value me, and how you value me shows up in things like compensation, investment in me, etc. Second is growth and development. And again, that doesn't have to be, promotions, but you know me well enough that we're maximizing my strengths and using my skills. And we've got a game plan for where my career aspirations are. So second is growth and development. Third is safety and security. And what that looked like pre-pandemic was most companies talking about we're successful, we're delivering, our projections, etc. But now it's taken on a new a new meaning with the pandemic. So safety and security in the future of the company, but also my personal safety and security. Fourth is trusting relationships. And that's why I talk about that walking your talk. And if you've got leaders who are not doing that, or you keep leaders around who are toxic to your environment because they produce, you are telling people what it is you really value, and you undermine the trust that's established when we agree to be in relationship with one another as an employer and employee. So 4 was trusting relationships. 5 is cohesion and disparity of experience. So cohesion being like, do I respect the people I work with? Can we collaborate and innovate and problem solve together? And that's where, sometimes that is team happy hours or having fun, team outings. But really it's about how can we work together? And then on the flip side of that is if you have a disparity of experience, like people who don't feel like they quite belong or they can quite fit in, or you have, and that's shown up a lot in terms of with women and people of color and their lived experience during the pandemic with employers versus the larger population. And then 6th is company future. Is there a future for this company? So all the things you were pointing to, Rick, in terms of, do we have a differentiated position in the marketplace and how are we driving that? So employees want to know, like, this company is solid. And then 7th is the work environment. And the work environment could be the physical environment. It could be, are you providing Wi-Fi for your remote employees? But the work environment is also like, is this a safe space for me to speak up and to share my ideas or share my concerns? So it is both physical, but it's also the experience of the work environment. And the last but not least is technology, or I like to think of it as, do I have the tools to do my job and be successful? And so those are the 8 areas. And if you're really clear about who your talent is that you need and you're targeting, and then you look at those 8 areas along with who you say you are as a mission and values, you can design a work experience that's really distinctive for you and delivers on that experience to employees. And then you're going to have stickiness. When someone joins, they're getting what they bought, so to speak, and they're more likely to stay with you, and you increase your stickiness with the organization.
That's a great list. And maybe something that we dive into again or deeper, maybe in a subsequent event, or maybe we write something up on it, but I love that list. And I'm with you all the way on those. So thanks for sharing that. Hey, tell us a little bit more about what makes the Awesome People Leader program distinct and appropriate in today's work environment. I appreciate the conversation we had about that. Tell us a little bit more and tell the audience about it.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. We're really excited, and more importantly, we're proud of the difference that it's making. So Awesome People Leaders, as I said, it came out of the work I was doing time and time again with clients and looking across and not seeing anything that quite fit the bill for either how we work as humans or the pace of work today. So Awesome People Leaders is, you can do it on desktop, but it's all mobile enabled. So it fits this sort of on the go. It is all micro lessons. And what I mean by micro lessons is it takes no more than 10 minutes for each topic. We've curated from over 100 different sources, and then we tailor it down to the most critical pieces that we need to know on a certain topic. And so you watch a 3 to 5 minute video. You have what's like a marketing collateral piece on the topic. So very scannable, very digestible. And then it's about putting it into action. So the fact that it's all micro lessons on a mobile device, and then the idea of being put it into action and weave it into what you're already doing fits how our brain works, because our brains cannot absorb more than 20 minutes of content. And then secondly, it works with the pace of business. Most of us can find 15 minutes in a week to absorb, a new piece of content. The other thing that we do is, so we have the scalability of being online with our mobile technology and all of that, but we also have a private online community It's locked down, not searchable for the search engines or anything. And it is a safe space for managers to ask questions, ask for resources, and they get a response within one business day. So it's almost real time. And then we also have monthly community calls where the managers show up and they just talk about what they're dealing with. And the thing I've learned in this process is, especially with new managers, sometimes they don't even know what the topic is called. And this happened on our call this month. Is I listened to 3 of the managers talk, and they were all talking about how to manage up, how to manage their managers. But they didn't know that's what the topic was. So they didn't think to like go in and pull that module. And that's why we do these calls and we have this online support. So I can go, here's what I think you're talking about. And we pull it up and we look at it live, and we'll even role play. And they're like, yes, this is exactly what I needed. And then they go off and we ask them to share back in the community. How did it go? What would they do differently next time? So we learn together too, as that safe space. So it's this combination of scalability and speed and bite-sized and being very practical, because as I said, I led functional teams for 20 years. So this is like how it really works, not like just the best practice, but how you actually apply it and what's challenging about that. And then provided with this support that is not common in online courses.
I love it. Look forward to following that and hearing more. So thanks for sharing that. Hey, one of the questions that we commonly ask folks that we talk to, and I asked you a little bit about what some of the things you learned from earlier in your career, but if you reflect on your career journey, what led you to where you are today, who you are today, how you think about what you do, was there some kind of key lesson that you wish you would have learned sooner as far as it relates to your career journey?
So probably what I would point to is, for so long, I thought, and I know that this can be quite common, that if I just worked really hard and did a good job, then I'll be rewarded with the next thing. And in a lot of ways, that was true. But where I made some mistakes in applying that is that, one, that's not always true. And I didn't spend as much time building my network and my relationships, particularly outside of my company. So I would get to know people inside of my company, and then you switch companies and I learned like, oh gosh, I don't really know anyone outside of my company. I didn't spend that time and investment because I was so focused on applying all my time and energy to working hard and doing a good job within the company. And I realized that was a mistake. I wish I would have made that investment in myself, because those relationships, one, they carry you through when you switch companies and you switch, roles, but also just to broaden my thinking, my perspective. I've been really fortunate that I've moved to some really different companies. So I've had some of that broadening. But for example, when I left United Health Group, because I had spent time in these large companies, my whole network was basically Fortune 500 people and Fortune 500 vendors, which is not very supportive when you're trying to start a small business serving small and mid-sized businesses. So that's the lesson I think I wish I would have learned much earlier in my career, is that it's not about just working hard and doing a good job and building the relationships inside the company. I wish I would have invested more in building my relationships outside whichever company I was at.
Yeah, I agree with you, because all those people who didn't build their relationships in their network call me when they're looking for a job. They're like, oh, you're connected and you know people and companies, and I'm looking for a company and I was busy, so I had my head down and I traveled and I did this and I did that, and then I don't have a network and now I need to find a job. And so I get a lot of those calls. So I'm going to agree with you 100%, Heather.
Yeah.
100%. Hey, in terms of wrapping up today, been a very insightful conversation. Thank you very much. Appreciate you sharing with us today. What would you sum up today's conversation in a way that maybe would have kind of one key takeaway or one key lesson, or if there was one thing that you wanted to anchor with our audience, whether they are watching here on video or whether they're listening on podcast, what would be the one key thing you'd like folks to remember?
How critical it is for us as individuals, as leaders, and as companies to walk our talk. There's a real strong need and pull and desire for authenticity in today's world and in the business marketplace. And it is, I think, a great reflection time for each of us as individuals, also as leaders and as companies, to say, are we showing up in what we've promised to people about who we are and what they can count on us for? And can we be honest with ourselves when we don't show up that way, because we're human, and then own it and clean it up? So I think the need to walk our talk is important for leading teams. It's important for growing careers, our own careers, and it's really important for companies. And I know companies really get that when it comes to the consumer and their customers. And there's just an opportunity to get that as strongly, if not more so, with the employees that work for them.
All right, Heather Polivka, welcome here to Club E. Thank you for the great conversation that we had in person at one of our recent Club E events. Thank you for today. Heather, how can somebody get a hold of you if they'd like to connect?
Yeah, well, they can email me at heatherp@heatherpsolutions. I welcome outreach on LinkedIn. And they can also go to our websites. Heather P Solutions are awesome people leaders, and there's always a button there to set up time with me. And I'd love to connect.
Sure. And on LinkedIn, spelling of her last name is Polivka. And so as you heard, our Club E community, if you'd like to connect up with Heather, you can find her on LinkedIn. Heather, thank you. Hope you come back again sometime. Like to dive into that list that you went into. I think that would be worth talking about further. And again, thank you very much and look forward to talking again.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.